Wow, Panos. That is amazing. That is a great reinterpretation of the original material. And I like the fact that you didn't necessarily add any bars. Like it's the same amount of bars. You didn't insert anything. You just reinterpreted the fabric. So nice. I think you're missing a fermata here. If I understand your playback correctly, your mock-up correctly, this really sounded like you had a fermata. You intended this to be a fermata on this beat, and there are a couple of other little bits and pieces. But let's just talk about the efficacy of this score. You know, whether or not it will work the way that you have scored it, and I mean, largely it will. This is kind of fun. I was setting up my work for the day and just making sure that all my materials were in order. And I'm actually not supposed to start. I've been trying to start a little later in the day when my voice is a little fresher and more well rested. And I just could not resist once I heard this again. Like I listened to your mock up and I looked over the score and everything else. And yeah, so let's just look at the material, all right? Like, I'll just comment on anything as we go. Okay, here I will give you a pass on dropping the piano type scoring onto your winds because I get the vibe that you are going after here. However, going forwards, right, you really have to think, Panos, like, what do you mean when you are putting a slur over something which is meant to be played in one breath and you have repeated notes? Are they to be played legato? Then in which case you don't need to slur them. You just can say mezzo forte legato, right? And then just do the slurring of which notes you actually really want to connect with breath. Or if you intend these to be played portato, like with the stomach making the articulation rather than the tongue, then mark that, right? But don't leave it up to the player, or else you'll have a bunch of different articulation styles by everybody, including like strings, if you do that in the strings. All right, so I can't say this enough. Please, everybody out there, okay? Experienced orchestrators or not experienced orchestrators, do not just drop the piano-style slurs onto your orchestration of a piano work. Right? Don't do that. Always think about what the actual needs of the player are, right? How can you make things clear? I mean, what does this mean? You know, da, da, da. What, I mean, what? What is this? Could you have done this with two slurs? You know, ta, 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 or ta, 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 Sorry. I kind of got stuck right there in the middle. All right. So, anyways, but here it's okay because that fits what you're doing here with this this beautiful sly reinterpretation of the harmony. Now that doesn't always work, as we'll see on the next screen, but for this, I think that it is all really clear. So I'm just kind of curious, like the way that you have this scored, the copyist and the conductor would both understand this to be the top pitch having a scoop to it, rather than both pitches. If you intended both pitches to have a scoop, then you have to have two scoops. Two scoops, just like ice cream. Just how delicious this arrangement is. And then, of course, the vibraphone in the back. This is nice. So what I'm assuming by the sound of your mock-up that you intend this to be the motor off, right? But you should mark it. Always mark the motor settings and vibraphone. And you can even mark the pedal markings, right? Like there is a... Just because you have a slur over something doesn't mean that it'll all be taken under one pedal, although that is sometimes how the composer is obviously intended to do this. I would actually put the xylophone on top of the vibraphone, right? I'd like to have the vibraphone not only like is it sort of lower in pitch and lower in sort of penetrative quality, but also if you have a gap underneath it in terms of like the bar lines, then you can easily put pedal markings in. All right, that's just my preference. It doesn't really matter too much to anybody, right? The changing there are different specifications of like how to put your how to arrange your percussion vertically, and some applications have chosen to default in some ways and others in others, right? All right, and so far as the orchestration is concerned, this is all fine. It's very, very cool. All right, and moving onwards, English horn, bass clarinet. Yeah, so I really wish, Panos, that you had scored this in transposing pitch. Now here you're literally saying four horns in F, right? Okay, just don't do that. Just don't have them in F, don't have them in anything. Just have no key signature, please. All right? It's totally not necessary. Like here you've got a B flat in the key signature and you immediately give me a B natural. All right, I would prefer to have it transposing. Right? See, it just got me confused. What you mean here, but since you have all of the key signatures in G, we would assume this would be a C score, right? And what did I ask for in the guidelines? Did you forget? You forgot that if you're going to have a score in C, that you should tell me that it's in C. All right, naughty, but I'll forgive you because your orchestration was so cool. I might just start back checking some of these, like as if I get an entry that really should be in, transposing, or just to help me give you feedback and so on. Then I might just get in touch with you way before the evaluation start and say, hey, can you give this to me this way or that way or whatever. All right, and I'm assuming that this means transposing an octave, but in C. Yeah, so bass clarinet in B flat and B flat. That's really strange. Two clarinets in A and A. All right. All right, so there needs to be some adjusting there. All right, so continuing on, I don't want to get hung up in the specifics because this got me real excited, so I don't want things to drag me down like the little niceties. All right, this is very cool. English horn, bass clarinet, and bassoons working together with these muted horns. So these muted horns sort of sound like muted trombones, right? And you might end up being dissatisfied with the sound that this makes, and you might actually want to put it into trombones, because F horns, like the F horns, Muted horns don't exactly sound that slinky. They do sound cool. They do have a fantastically amazing sound, but this was really sounded trombone-ish to me, like trombone with mutes, the way that the mock-up sounded. So if you really are scoring to the mock-up, you want things to sound a lot like the mock-up, then I would possibly consider changing this to trombones. All right, and then you've got the little extra reinforcement here from violas and first violins, and then this is so awesome, the walking bass in 6/4. That's so cool. And continuing on, adding clarinets to this and taking out the bass clarinet. So not too much of a difference there. And then bass clarinet coming in here with this beautiful little arc, which has some relationship, coincides a little bit with the pizzicato, but isn't exactly the same thing. Starting off like the D and the E, but then after that, separating in function. Yeah, and this is so nice. Then the walking bass sort of ends, but it's cool. I mean, I think that if you kept going with it, that we would get tired of it. But you give us just enough so that it sounds like it'll be something we never forget, right? Just awesome. Okay, so I'm kind of curious why you left out the slur here, and why you are changing the direction of the slurs, and why there is first voice and second voice here. Perhaps this is a copy-paste error or some other kind of a thing. Here you are scoring lower arpeggiation for the harp. I would bring up the dynamic here, and I would put the dynamic marking in the middle, in between the staves, even though you're scoring for the left-hand staff. And as far as that goes, if you really want to help the harpist out, you could break this across two hands, right? The harpist might end up playing it all with the left hand, but actually, like, I might score this with everything above A in this bar being in the right-hand staff in treble clef, or it shouldn't be in bass clef. That's too weird. But yeah, treble clef kind of so that it's something that the dividing it between hands is just sort of easier for the harpist. And then here, probably like everything above E, I would have in the right hand, or possibly everything above G, right? So just that would give the G and the B to the right hand, and then this G, right? And that's just easier. That all sits under one hand, and the harpist doesn't have to change position with their hands. And then this could be split between the two hands. I think that would be a better way of dealing with this. But it's sort of interesting. Like, first you start off with pizzicato in the second violins, and then you sort of give your harpist that line, almost as if to say, well, the pizzicato was getting lower and lower, and my violas were all tied up, so the harpist just played it. Well, why doesn't the harp just play it all the way through? But it's still kind of a cool idea to start off pizzicato and then go to harp. I think you could mark the harp up to piano. Just put the dynamic in the middle, not at the bottom. Okay, yeah, and then this little push here, pianissimo. I really love how nicely you have managed the dynamics right in here. I don't think this needs to be mezzo forte, right? I think that for like your overall approach is to have more unified dynamics, except for little special effects, and I think that's very wise. I don't think the English horn needs to be all that loud here. I mean, I think that piano espressivo would do the job just as well as mezzo forte here. I mean, it'll sound better. This mezzo forte sounds better in your mock-up, and you can leave it that way if you like. But yeah, but I mean, considering how you're bringing in featured instruments with little mezzo forte lines, I'd say it's all fine. But realistically speaking, you might not need to do that. So what's the dynamic here? Mezzo forte diminuendo, what? Piano, right? Or maybe mezzo piano, since you are going piano crescendo and back, piano crescendo. What's the dynamic here? Well, the contrabassoonist thinks that it's piano. These are some pretty high lines here, or high notes to start cold. Certainly not impossible for a good, experienced contrabassoon player, you know. But I mean, it's like not the most ideal entrance, right? I mean, this is a better this would probably sound better on bass clarinet. But seeing as how you are grouping these all together, I mean, but like then here you have the same G, right? You're having this telescoping and stuff. Yeah, I mean it's all right. It's not great, but it's all right. It'll work fine, but it may stick out a little bit. So watch out. Yeah, and this is all cool. I like this a lot. Yeah, that all that scoring is good, except for one little thing. Like you've got octaves in your hobos and your flutes here, and you are putting your second flute below your second oboe. So you have two things that don't work. One is the notion that somehow your second flute would contribute meaningfully to this texture. And the other thing is to put, is to enclose oboes with flutes, right? So that doesn't quite work. Like the oboe will overwhelm the second flute. If anything, it should be the other way. But even at that, it's not the best register for that flute to really meaningfully contribute. I mean, essentially, you've got the same notes. Like what would I put there? I would put a clarinet there, and look, you've got a clarinet there, so you don't even need the second flute there. And as far as the E is concerned, nobody's going to hear that either, and you've got that note in your English horn, right? So pretty much the whole second flute part is not even needed at all because of all the other doubling with much stronger, more pungent instruments playing right over it, right? Nobody is going to hear it. But I mean, if you insist on putting it in there, nobody's going to stop you. What happens here? Are you telescoping together to A2? You need to tell us. Sort of in general, right? I mean, some of these things you are dealing with. Sometimes you are being very polite and you are telling us which voice an instrument is in, but other times, I mean, but shouldn't you have a rest here too in first voice? And shouldn't you tell us which trumpet player this is, right? And then you can also, this is, I see what you're doing here. You're tying across, but in 6/4, it is perfectly acceptable to have eighth quarter note across the first strong beat. Okay, and then flutter tonguing. I mean, this just kills me, this little C sharp B. There's so many nice features to this. It's really a likable score. Yeah, just so appealing. And then these little, pushing into the next bar. Tam-tam roll. Rolling to what? Right, your tam-tam player is going to be listening to your timpani player rolling up to mezzo forte, and if you do not give them a destination dynamic, they are going to roll up to mezzo forte, and is that what you want? Do you really want the tam-tam player to cut off here? I would make this really clear, right? Do you want them to roll to what dynamic, and do you want it to hang on, or do you want it to damp? I would actually mark whether, I'd absolutely be really sure, just because of the nature, the delicacy of the scoring. You really want to be completely clear with your tam-tam player. So rolling to what? Mezzo piano? Or piano, you already are at piano, but why not start at pianissimo and roll forwards to piano or mezzo piano, and then either have this, have like a hanging tie, or a full bar, or say damp, right? So just make the choice. Don't let the player raise their hand and say, "Where's the composer? I need an answer for so and so," right? Because at that point you just wasted $50, right, of rehearsal time. So just really try to be clear about things like this. Anything that would cause somebody to raise their hand, Learn to know what those things look like. This would be something, right? This would be something where the conductor might ask you, right? They might sort of stop the rehearsal and say, "What do you want there? Do you want a hanging tie? Do you want?" All right. So I'll stop crabbing about it. So here we're going to violas. All right. So cool. And we have this lovely interpretation of the melody, violas above and then pianissimo bassoons below, right? So you're trying to have the best of both worlds. You're trying to harmonize below these weaker violas with bassoons without having to double the violas to maintain their strength. What you're missing are nuances, right? Do you really, really want the violas just to go da 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 da? And you also have these incredibly long slurs. What if you went down, up, down, crescendo, right, diminuendo, da, down, up, down? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's more you could do with this. Doesn't have to just sort of sit there and like tootle along with no nuances, right? You can be expressive with this. I mean, this is soul music, okay? This is something that Barvinsky understood. He understood the sights and essences and feelings of his country like nobody else. Do you know what I mean? It's something that you really pick up from it, and I would say it's even stronger than other Ukrainian and Ukrainian-born musicians or composers that I have looked over before I made my final decision on Barvinsky. He just really gets it, right? You just are immediately there. Okay. And then you've got these cellos, like this, a complete rewriting, a complete reinterpretation of the left-hand patterns, which work great on cello. This is just fantastic. Really great cello scoring. You know, it's almost like a Bach cello sonata or cello suite, the way that you've got this scored. Sorry, he didn't write sonatas, he wrote suites for the cello. And then here we start to run into our first problem in terms of balance. You have the first, second violins, da-dum, and here you've got double the strength, right? Trombones and bassoons. Bassoons going up to piano, trombones going up to piano. What the heck is the dynamic here? If it's not mezzo piano or mezzo forte, we have an imbalance here. And even at that, even with these instruments playing softly and bringing up the dynamic of the strings here, the weight, the rate of the resonance is still mismatched, right? So you need to think about it. Of course, this type of scoring is very, very warm and beautiful inside of these patterns. So what's the answer? I'm sorry, but if you want to balance with this, you're going to have to double with a wind instrument, right? That is the way to bring this out and balance with the bassoons and trombones. All right, and now you're bringing in your first violin, which we see on the next page, turns into octaves. Once again, it's an imbalance. I think you will need to do some kind of doubling, whether it's like oboe and English horn or whatever. Just don't have second flute on this lower tone. Please don't. It'll accomplish next to nothing. Okay. Okay, so all right, so here what is the chord here, Panos? A minor, right? What is your left hand? What are your lower strings playing? E minor. Do you intend that? Or did you just forget to change this to you were probably if you had intended to change this, you might have been intending to go E C A, right? Which is also a very easy pattern to play, just all sixths on your cellos. So I just think that if you change this to E C A, and so on, E C A C E, then I think that this would just the ear wouldn't go, what? The problem is like you have these beautiful ambiguities, right? Right in here, and they're all beautifully calculated, right? And they work great. You have worked them out and everything else. And then here, this doesn't feel calculated. It feels like a mistake, right? So think about it, please. So, if it was intentional, it might not be working. So here, like, you have got just a little touch of lower reeds in here, and you've got these lovely harmonies happening with your upper strings, and then the patterns with your lower strings. It just works great. It doesn't need anything. It's perfect. There's the one thing that I would mention here is that this feels naked. Boom, right? And you could have easily, seeing how this note here is the E that's right in here. I feel that the cello could have done something that that sort of came up to meet this E, or ended together. Like maybe you could have gone G, B, E, upper E, rather than lower E here. Or maybe did G and then these two notes, the B and the E, that are higher, and then ended here, right? Rather than going all the way down to the low E, because suddenly, absence. It's not a smooth transition to having nothing but violas. I would rethink these last three notes. All right. But I love the simplicity here. I think that's very effective. Okay. And then we have these big rolls in the harps. Those are all very effective. Okay. Now, this is all very fun. Contrabassoon starting low, arcing upwards, and then you have the clarinet trading off on this A. I am actually going to do a tip on where are the best places to dovetail between instruments, like which registers are the most complementary. The problem here is that you are going from a sort of a slightly tremulous, slightly forced register in bass clarinet to a kind of a thinner, less full register right in here. So that is an intriguing place to do your trade-off. Get into the throat tones, trading off with the bass clarinet. Now, keep in mind, though, this is a clarinet, right? So, really what you've got is like the lower clarino going into the throat tones above. Well, it's not a huge difference in timbre, but I think that if you had traded off on a written C, that would have been a cleaner transition. And in fact, like actually gone, if you want to do the two-note dovetailing, then I would have traded off on the G and the C, right? Just go G, C, and then stop in your bassoon, trading off to sounding G, C in the A clarinet, and then continuing on. And then here you have like English horn. I mean, it's a pretty long. Yeah, the thing is, like, if you keep your dovetailing, if you really spread your dovetailing out, the sounds of the mixed sound of the instruments, unless you really have a fade out and a fade in, and I'm not seeing a fade out and a fade in here. I mean, like piano diminuendo, piano diminuendo to what? To pianissimo, to triple P? What is going on here? And you also have the diminuendo across the line rather than at the point of the seam between the lines, right? I mean, and at the very moment when this line should be opening out, right? And just like in soaring in the clarinet, you're telling it to be quiet. Get rid of this, put it in here, diminuendo down to pianissimo, start pianissimo here, crescendo into piano, right? That's what I would do. All right, and this is all lovely right in here. Right, and like here you're sort of starting. I mean, I do see what you're doing here. You're transitioning to a to the start of the new the sort of the new regime, right? But I still feel that like whatever it happens, the seam is still clumsy here. So the new regime is English horn, and then flute. And I still cannot figure out why you dropped the arc. Like you just let the arc slump. And I feel that this slump in the arc, instead of just giving it like trading off to piccolo and having it continue on way high, I think that would have been incredibly dramatic. Just to take it all the way up to high E in the piccolo, right? That's still, you can still be poetic up there. The piccolo doesn't become inalterably shrieky until G sharp above the staff. Okay, but here then this E can still be really just terrifically gorgeous and dramatic, and then you can come back down and dovetail back into the flute part right here, and then end up just very naturally on this C trill. So yeah, so I just felt that this felt like a slump to me dramatically, right? It just felt like you suddenly dropped it an octave, rather than because like you've set up the expectations here for a beautiful arc, right? That goes all the way up to E and then turns around. Now here you have a beautiful arc that is headed for a high E, and then all of a sudden ka-chunk, right? Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. All right, and this is all perfectly fine. The oboe descending, yeah. And now we're getting into some fun stuff. Here you interpreted, and the vibes accompaniment and so on, and this soft stuff. I think that all works great. Okay, so now getting into C. Yeah, and here like you have like a circle for the open. I'm just going to go back and check something here. All right, C. That's the wrong sign. Okay, so mute. What is the sign that cancels mute? Is senza sword, right? It is not O for open. You would use the circle to indicate a cancellation of stopped pitches, right? Stopped pitches and muted pitches are two completely different things. They have a similar sound to the point at which some applications, some plugins in notation software have the same exact sound, but it is not the same exact sound. The stopped pitches have this sort of flat, squashed sound. Muted pitches have this sort of kind of slightly, they have a sound that's sinister in a different way, more slinky, more dangerous, and less stomped on, right? Okay, so right here you sort of turn this into a lovely little waltz, right? And with a snare drum, right? So it's almost like a military waltz or something like that. But let's just focus on let's not worry too much about the character, right? Let's focus on the practicality of scoring. Okay, if there's one problem here, I would say, is that these registers and the use of the bassoon to harmonize is really exactly the same thing as like what you did here with the violas and the bassoons, right? So in a way, you're sort of repeating yourself, right? And we're still kind of feeling that muted energy. You could have put this anywhere. You could have put it up an octave. You could have put it up 2 octaves. You could have had it down in the basement, right? You could have had this melody played on tuba with, murky lower strings below it. You could have done a lot of different things, but you chose to repeat the harmonization of the bassoon. So I would submit to you that despite the fact that using the horn is a really beautiful thing to do, I just like it just feels a little repetitious, possibly. You have to tell us which horn, right? So senza sword 1. we're assuming, right? First horn. It is lovely, though. Like everything aside, reuse of registers and everything aside, it's really a lovely idea. All right, so here we're getting into into the rest of C and D. How dare you, Panos? You are denying me the right to continue evaluating your work just as it starts to get really interesting and, and slightly hypnotic and obsessive. Well, that's all right, but I will just settle for stopping here. Okay, and you don't have to import this into your file. Whether I'm using Petrochenko's like a Violina Petrochenko's interpretation of this or the original piano score, which, by the way, I still don't know whether Violina's use of the 16th note going into the next bar, sort of an anacrusis, whether that is the correct way, and perhaps the piano score has got it wrong. Like it's an earlier version, or it's not the version that Barvinsky preferred later on in life. He may have rescored it, and we just don't have our hands on that edition because this is the problem in the West, is that we don't have access to a lot of scores. I remember that a lot of the great Russian ballet works from before the time and around the time of Tchaikovsky, and some French works that were that were basically championed by Russian composers, like by Delibes and so on and so forth. They basically just only existed in Russian editions or in just scores that were kind of coveted by different ballet companies. So a lot of these things, were just not heard, like we're not staged in the West, which really should be, like Bayadere, right? Who's heard of that? It was just, there was a kind of a cultural clampdown on certain works, especially Minkus. I'm just thinking of what are the great Russian composers from before Tchaikovsky of that, that theatrical ballet music and so on. So this pretty much goes on in the same kind of vein, and it all works fine. And I think you could have probably done more with it, but I think this was just a warm up to this. So it's all fine. This all works good, and it's very cool. If one thing I would have to say about proportions with this, Panos, is that you set up some expectations at the beginning of the score. That there would be a kind of massive reinterpretation throughout, right? But going forwards, the harmony's more conventional, the scoring approaches, while really differing and changing a few things, aren't all that much altered. So I think that at the beginning, not only are our expectations sort of prepared for you to do something very wild with the rest of the piece, but you are actually giving yourself permission with this very powerful introduction, this very powerful prologue, to really change things around even more than you did here, right? So keep that in mind. If you put all that work into it to just really give yourself that that sort of quality of adventure and exploration, then just follow it, take it further. Go for it. Do all kinds of crazy things, right? All kinds of exploratory, experimental things. I would welcome it. You could make this sound, even more jazzy. There was definitely a kind of a Gershwin character to this, or maybe also reminded me a bit of Andre Previn and some of the 50s composers who mix jazz and classical idioms in their film scores and in some of their concert works. I mean, there's even a touch here of Günter Schuller, right? I mean, it just really was a powerful beginning, and I think that there's a lot to be said for what follows, but except that I would have wanted it to go even more so, right? So anyway, but whatever it is, it's a great entry, and I really appreciate all the work that you put into it, all the dedication, and your continued participation in these annual challenges. I really am looking forward to what you could possibly do with the next three challenges. I'm sort of chuckling and rubbing my hands together here, literally as well as mentally, about what people will think about the next three. Yeah, it just it'll be pulling everybody in three different directions, so that we don't just get stuck on. I think that we're sort of getting a little bit in the lane of the same time period, and whatever, even though there might be very widely different sensibilities, there still was a sort of a common thread of the influence of Impressionism, Post-Romanticism, and everything else. Like we see that in this work. It was in the Boulanger. It was in the Faya, right? It was in the Ravel, right? So I'm really going to try to shake things up and sort of pull us in a bunch of different directions over the next 3 years with a massive, with a ton of options and a really wide scope of different possible things to orchestrate for our 10th anniversary. Okay, so with that, I will just thank you for everything that you're doing here, your participation, your support on Patreon, which is helping musicians in Ukraine. I'll have some more on that. I think that I'm going to make that announcement just right after the beginning of October, like what we have done. And then also, like everybody who's watching this, I'm sure you guys have got lots to say. You probably have already typed, half of you have probably already typed your response to the opening after you heard it. So just really give all that feedback to Panos, make it constructive, make it something that's really useful to him. Go ahead and mention all the things that I missed and the things that you disagree with me on. That's all fair. And this was just a really great start to my day of evaluating. So I'm going to go make sure that my son has breakfast, and then I'm going to come back and evaluate the next score. So I hope that you will join me with that, which will be released a little bit later today if my plans for releases are working the way that I expect them to. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.